family is healed, and my city will see revival. My body is healed. Do you believe it? My mind is healed. My family is healed. Oh, and my city will see revival. My body is healed. My mind is healed. In Jesus' name. In my city will see revival. He has all power. He has all authority. My mind is healed. Speak the name over your life. Speak the name over your situation. In my city will see revival. It is done. It is done. In the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. It is done. It is done. In the name. There's so much power in the name. It is done. Miracles are happening right now. If you need something from the Lord, speak it over your life. Only His name can save. Only His name can heal. It is done. In the name. In the name. My body is healed. My mind is healed. My family is healed. My city will see revival. We serve a miracle working God. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. Oh, in my city will see revival. My body is healed. He has the power and authority. He's working in this place. God will believe you for it. We'll believe you for it. My city will see revival. Somebody worship the Lord. Come on, there's so much power in that single name. Speak the name of Jesus. It's already done. Oh, it's already done. Oh, it's already done. Oh, it's already done. He's a miracle worker. He's a promise keeper. So much power in that name. It's already God, we thank you for it. We believe you for it. Come on, somebody needs to believe that that name can change your life. It's in the book. There's power in the name. He's given you authority to speak over your situation, to speak over your life, to speak over your family.
You've been so good, Lord, you are good. You've been better than good. I can't praise you enough. I owe you my love. Can't praise
Praise the Lord, everybody. You glad to be in the Lord's house tonight? Come on, let's stand together and have a word of prayer. Delight to have each and every one of you here tonight. You're in for a very special evening, and I know that you're going to have some great information that's going to come your way, but more importantly, perhaps you're going to be able to get some insight that's going to encourage your faith to continue to support, pray for the wonderful Jewish people in the nation of Israel. I do not believe that it is an accident that our guests were here a few weeks ago and our guests tonight at this very critical hour when Israel is at the forefront of the news and forefront of the United States policies and so forth. So we're glad for him to be here. I'll give him a proper introduction here in just a few moments. But for all of you that are here this evening, we are certainly glad to have you and all of you that are joining us online. If you'd like to be able to share this broadcast out so that others can be able to connect with it, I would encourage you to be able to do that. As we go to the Lord in prayer tonight, I just want to mention that on this prayer sheet are a number of names of people that are needing uplifting in prayer. I encourage you to do that, as well as those that have lost loved ones over the past several days. And we need to be sure to hold them up in the prayers that God would surround their life and give them strength in this very critical hour. We have several folks in the recent days that are right on the edge, and families are in the middle of all of that. And I know that the Lord in His comfort is able to strengthen them. So I was telling someone just today, that's why having a church family and a group of people that love and are concerned and will pray for people, even though they may not even know who they are, they're concerned and they let the love of the Lord be penetrating into the lives of other people. And when you do that, I want you to know whatever you sow, come on, talk to me Wednesday crowd, whatever you sow, you're going to reap. And if you'll do that this evening in the behalf of all these people, then when you're in need, someone's going to step up and do their part in your behalf. So let's pray and believe God together tonight. Amen. Father, we thank you this evening for your great grace and your mercy upon us. We thank you because that you, Lord, overshadow us and you keep us moment by moment. You promise you'll never leave us and forsake us. And because of that, we can have confidence to come boldly before the throne of grace and ask you in the behalf of so many other people that are needing healing in their body, sickness that may be occurring, whatever the situations may be, you're the God who is the present help in that time of trouble. And Lord, even now for those that are needing the comfort of the Holy Spirit around their life, for Lord, those that have passed and some that are, Lord, even now in that position, we pray that you would just surround them and give them the comfort that they need tonight, the words of encouragement, the strength that only you can bring. We thank you for it tonight. We ask you to bless this service. Let the presence of God be felt. And Lord, as we encourage and lift up the Jewish people and the nation of Israel and our whole part in being able to see the kingdom come, we pray that you, Lord, would do your part in this place by hovering your presence down upon us, and don't let us leave here the same way we came. We give you the glory, the honor, and the praise for it, for we ask it in your name. And everybody shouted a great big amen. Would you turn to the nearest aisle and go around and find somebody that needs a handshake and a smile and let them know how glad you are to see them in this service this evening. And for all of you that are joining us online, we're blessed to have you from around the world. We want you to stay tuned. In just a few moments, you're going to be able to enjoy the information and the message that comes from our very special guest that is going to bless your life tonight, encourage you. It may challenge you, but I know that you'll be blessed being a part of it. Let us know where you're watching from. There's someone standing by to be able to chat with you. Your prayer requests that are there online, do that. We'll be glad to agree with you in prayer, believing God for miracles for your life. And we thank you. In a moment, you're going to get the privilege of being able to give into the kingdom. So I want you to get ready to do that. You can do it online or on the app. Be sure to get ready to do that along with everybody here in this sanctuary. And thank you for joining us this evening from around the world. Praise the Lord. Praise God. Are you blessed tonight? I know that you are, and I want you to get ready to be a part of kingdom giving. And here's what I need you to do, please, this evening. We're going to ask you to give. If you didn't get a chance to do your giving for tithes this past weekend, they'll put it on the screen. You can do that online on your phone or in the buckets that are provided in the back, the envelopes that are available for you. But I'm going to ask you this evening, because we're going to be receiving a very special love offering for our guest that is here. He's traveling. He's been in the States now for a couple of weeks, I believe he said, and going from place to place. I mean, was delivered to us today from Panama City after speaking last night there. He'll be speaking here tonight, and then he will get to the airport at probably 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and head to a different location. He's been from Israel all the way to Boise, Idaho. You've been somewhere now. And so he's traveling the United States, bringing the awareness and information. And I'm just going to tell you, we're blessed to be able to have him here tonight. So if you're giving in your tithe, go ahead and do that toward the kingdom work here at Pace Assembly. But if you're giving in an offering, at the conclusion of the service tonight, I've asked him to do this. I don't do this for everyone coming in, but I sense the need to do this tonight. I want to give you that opportunity to be able to put that offering right into his hands and to be able to bless him straight up. So after his message this evening, he'll be standing right down front. We'll have some ushers that will flank him, and we want you to be able to come and greet him and let him know how much you appreciate him being here this evening. As you're doing that, let me just mention a couple, 2 or 3 things that I need you to be aware of. We have 60, I think it's 61. Tell me, 63, I'll take them all. 63 people that are scheduled for water baptism this coming weekend. Amazing, huh? That's a lot of folk. We only have one baptismal pool, and I will just tell you candidly, after about the first 20, it gets a little rough. So here's what we're going to do, and I need all of you that are here and those of you that may be getting water baptized that are watching online. I'm going to ask you to do this. We're going to have to break this up so that we can be able to accommodate, because that's an awful lot of folks in one day. I'm thrilled about it, you know. And if you were really spiritual, we just go down to the Florida town and do it in the cold water. But I know y'all are all warm and nice feeling right now, but you're either saved or really lost when you hit that cold water. Listen, I was raised, we didn't have a baptismal pool in our church. We couldn't afford one. So Turkey Creek over on Eglin Air Force Base and we had to shoo the snakes away so that we could do some water baptism. I can assure you we were really saved by the time we came up out of the water. And it was cold, but we've got one prepared for the comfort, and we want to be able to do that in an orderly fashion. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask everybody, and we'll be getting contact with you over the next couple of days, but everybody whose last name starts from A to J will be involved this weekend for water baptism. I think we can accommodate that group, and then next weekend we'll pick up everybody from there to Z. And we need you to be able to be aware of that. But I don't want you to be discouraged because we move you to one week or the other, because we want you to be able to experience this incredible testimony that is going to take place for you. And you know what? We've got whole families that are being baptized all at the same time. Isn't that incredible? I love it. So listen carefully, watch carefully. That information will be coming your way over the next couple of days individually as you've signed up for water baptism. Let me also say, this coming weekend, I want you to make plans to be here. Bring somebody with you. We'll pick up on the second part of the message series, Build His Church. And we're going to be talking about freedom this weekend. We don't want you to miss that. Then immediately following the service, one of the long-standing members who passed away back in December, they held the service off until after the first of the year to get past holidays and get family in town and so forth. We will be holding that memorial service after the morning service for Sister Geraldine Hilburn. And I want you to, if you can be here in attendance, it will be an encouragement. The water baptism will be going on at the same time, so I'll be handling that service in here, and then Pastor T and company will be out there water baptizing in the gymnasium. But if you can be able to be a part of that, it will be an encouragement to the family. I can assure you that it will. If you haven't signed up for the Easter drama program presentation, be sure to do that this coming Sunday night at 5 o'clock. We're going to have a mass meeting with everybody that's going to be involved in that production over Easter weekend. And we need you to sign up and be here. We need all the help that we can get to be able to present the gospel. And then, of course, for all you ladies, don't forget Friday the 28th, the last Friday of the month, will be VW night right here, Victorious Women Night, hosted by my wife, and Kim Owens will be the very special guest. You will not want to miss that very special night right here in the sanctuary. Invite your friends, invite other churches to come, ladies to be able to come. Men, this is a ladies' event. If you come, you sit in the risers, and we let the ladies take over the house that night. And that will all start at 7 p.m. on Friday, February the 28th, and we don't want you to miss that. A lot of things that are transpiring, a lot of things that are happening in the days ahead. So you can always check the calendar of events that are coming up. They're updated regularly at paceassembly.org or on the app. And I would encourage you to be able to do that. And let me just say to you, yesterday, another installment on my podcast for Prophecy Files briefing that takes place. And we talk more about what's happening with Gaza, and we talk more about what Israel's part is and what the Bible has to say concerning that. So I would encourage you to go online and listen to that. It's about 9 minutes or so each time. We record it every Tuesday morning and release it. And we've got one more installment dealing with the nation of Israel and the prophetic significance of that inside of the Word of God. I am an amateur, but you're about to hear from an expert. Because tonight's very special guest is a wonderful friend, not only of this ministry, but the first time I ever had the chance to be able to meet him was on a pastor's trip to Israel. And we were getting ready to go to one particular location. I think it was right outside of Bethlehem, perhaps, right there on by what you would see as the concrete wall guarding Israel in one particular location. And the bus pulled up, and all of a sudden, this man jumped on board, took the microphone, and began to open up and give us understanding, because he's been there, done that. He is a veteran IDF soldier, but he's active as well. He's been active over the past several months, of course, due to October 7th. Very much involved, very much knowledge of what's taking place, and literally lives with his wife and beautiful son up on the northern border of Israel. Having never left during all that has been going on, his family remains right there. And as I was thinking about him tonight, a few words came to my mind. He's a protector, he's a provider, he's an individual who is in defense of Israel in every way, both spiritually, mentally, physically, and militarily. He is giving himself to do that, and he comes to the States periodically to be able to continue to help people be aware, support what's taking place in his outreach and helping the Jewish people and helping the ministry he's involved in. And I am delighted that he has come here tonight. As I bring him on here in just a moment and he takes the opportunity to be able to speak, I just want to share one thing with you as a way of introduction. He's been speaking now in the States for a couple of weeks, and over the past couple of days he's been in Panama City, but more importantly for you, in Tallahassee at FSU campus. Now let me bring you some perspective real quick. As a matter of fact, if you'll throw that picture up on the wall, this is one of the largest fraternities in the university scale. It's right there on FSU campus. They invited him to come, about 300 in this particular fraternity. But here's the important thing. This is a Jewish IDF soldier who stepped onto the campus by invitation to be able to speak to them about the issues. And I asked him, how did they receive him? Because please remember this, February 2023, anti-Semitic signs and activity was happening on the FSU campus. As of 2 days ago, he received a hero's welcome as a Jewish IDF soldier on the FSU campus. Would you stand with me tonight and welcome back to Pace, Florida? He's been here before. Our own Elliot Chodoff. Would you welcome here tonight? Come on, give him a great big God bless you, would you?
Thank you. Make me earn it. What I want to do tonight in the time that we have, and we can't pretend that in an hour or so I can cover everything in terms of depth and breadth of what's gone on in the past year plus. But I want to talk about what went wrong, and I think it's important to talk about what went wrong. What turned around after what went wrong, and how did we get to where we are today? I will, in addition to that, try to go a little bit forward, just a little bit, but in general, that's a dangerous thing to do. I don't do prophecy. I'm a disciple of two great political philosophers, Winston Churchill and Yogi Berra, who both said it's best to prophesy about things that have already happened. Okay? In the Middle East, that's even more so. And Pastor knows, a few minutes ago I went online on my phone to check the news. So I'm up to date as of about 5 or 10 minutes ago. That doesn't mean that things haven't changed since then. Okay? That's my sort of disclaimer. On October 7th, 2023 at 6:30 in the morning, it was a Shabbat, the Sabbath, it was Simchat Torah, the last holiday of the Jewish holiday season that begins with the New Year's on Rosh Hashanah. At 6:30 that morning, Hamas launched a massive attack against southern Israel out of Gaza. I'm not going to regale you with the details. You know what happened. A bunch of murderers, rapists, kidnappers, mutilators, body snatchers. In other words, every savagery possible was done that day in the communities of southern Israel and in a song dance festival that was being held in that area. They didn't do the unimaginable, they did everything imaginable by savages. When it was over, 1,200 were killed, murdered, mostly civilians, some soldiers. Over 250 taken hostage. Communities burned, destroyed, and Israel had to move on from there. It happened as a result of the greatest failure of the IDF, of the Israeli military, in its history. And I say that as an active reserve officer in the IDF. Despite my advanced age, they can't get rid of me. They've tried. I take it personally because it is the military that I'm part of. I wasn't there, but responsibility goes through the entire system. It was a total, absolute, abject failure. And it raises essentially a question. It wasn't just a failure of the IDF, it was a failure of the entire country, of the political, military leadership system. Because it wasn't a failure of a day. It was a failure that had begun earlier and led up to that day. And I want to break it down a little bit. We still haven't done all of our investigations. A bunch of them have been done. Some of them have been publicized. I can talk about the non-classified, and there's a lot that's not classified. I will not talk about what is classified. Sorry. But it raises the question, how does really an army that is known as the best in the world fail so miserably? How does a country that is so aware of what's going on fail so miserably? And there are a number of reasons, but I want to start with sort of an overarching one. And you don't mind if I teach a little Torah along the way, right? Okay. The golden calf. Right? A great failure. Sin, right? But a great failure. The man singly most responsible for the golden calf was Aaron. Aaron, the high priest. The guy who's in direct connection to God. How does he fail so miserably? Because he's a good man. By the way, note, he's not punished for it. He's not punished. He's a good man, and he does something that good people will do mistakenly. He thinks he can manage evil. Right? He says, now he knows what the problem is, right? They've miscounted by a day. Moses is coming down, but he's coming down tomorrow. And the people are in an uproar, and he thinks to himself, a day, I can do this. I'm going to give them a bunch of tasks, and it's got to take them at least a day, and then Moses will come back, and it's all solved. But of course, as we know, evil has its own timetable and its own method, and the next thing he knows, they're dancing in front of the calf. You can't manage evil. We think we can because we're good people. Right? Okay, because we may recognize evil, but because we're good people, we don't really understand it. Right? There's a barrier there that we just can't cross, and that's a good thing. We have to recognize that barrier. That's the difficult thing. And say, up to here. From here on, it's across the way. Now, how does that play itself out in Israel? It plays itself out that over a decade, even though we've had fighting conflicts, battles with Hamas, it was always limited. It was limited to a certain period of time. Then there was a ceasefire. Ceasefire with terrorist organizations, by the way, have a different sort of connotation than normal ceasefires. Ceasefire with terrorists means we cease, they fire. But we can take it. Nobody wants war. Right? War is a bad thing. My advisor in grad school always used to say, the only real decisions you ever have to make are choosing between bad and worse. Right? Between good and bad, any idiot can make a decision. Between good and good, why agonize? But the real decisions are when you're faced with only bad options and you have to choose the least bad among them. Right? Bad and wrong are not the same thing. You cannot convince me, you can try, you cannot convince me that going to war is a good thing. But I will easily convince you that going to war can be the right thing. Okay? But we prefer not to make bad decisions. And once again, good people can very easily slide over and say, well, you know what? So they violated the ceasefire. We don't want to go to war. Give them a little more space. We can manage this. We fall into another trap. You know, people are just people. And we all want the same thing. Not true. Not true. We all think the same way. Not true. And our understanding of how the world works has got to be the same as their understanding. Not true. In the West, we operate by a fallacy that in a country, let's say like the United States or in a country like Israel, works most of the time because most of us follow more or less the same general system. It's an economic theory. There are two great theoretical economists that almost all economics is based on one of the two. One is named Karl Marx. It's kind of the left end of the spectrum. And the other is named Adam Smith, who's kind of the right end of the economic spectrum, right? Socialism, communism on one end, free market capitalism on the other end. What do they have in common? One thing: the fallacy that economics dictates human behavior. Now, most people sort of fall into that, right? Just give somebody a job, let them earn an honest living, everything will be fine. But more important than economics for many people is ideology. And higher than just ideology is religious ideology. And that overcomes economics. And incidentally, and I make no comparison, I don't want to be misquoted, we of all people should know that. How much would it take to buy you out of your faith? In other words, there's something higher than economic value. But the Israeli system, thinking we can keep things quiet, we can manage this, let's allow Qatar to give them money, cash every month. We'll give them some more work permits, and that will keep things calm. Everything will be fine because all they want is quiet and to build and to live a normal life. Not true. As a corollary to that, since we're already managing all of this, we don't really need as strong a military as we once did. You know, militaries are expensive, and we have better things to do with our money. Infrastructure, education, and those are very important things. So, you know, tanks are very expensive. Running them and maintaining them are very expensive. So let's cut a third of them out and we'll save some money. Apache helicopters are very expensive. They're even more expensive than tanks. And it costs a lot of money to train the guys to fly them. Let's take half of them out of our arsenal. And this was done in the years prior. And I mention those things as indicators, not as the cause themselves, because they're both a cause and an effect of a way of thinking. We can shrink our forces. We can reduce the time of obligatory military service. In Israel, we don't have a draft. We don't have a selective service. I call it a non-selective service. Not everybody serves, but everybody is obligated to serve. Very, very different from the American system. At 16 in Israel, you don't register for the draft, you register for induction, which takes place at 18 or when you finish high school. And the obligatory service was 3 years, but that's a long time, so it was cut back. Now, when you cut back obligatory service by even 6 months, you're greatly reducing your combat capability, because I'm going to say something that may sound trivial, but it's true. When you cut 6 months off the 3 years of service, you're cutting off the last 6 months, right? In other words, those 6 months of fully trained soldiers, right? So the numbers that you're reducing are the numbers of your power, not the people who are training to become your power. I will say to that, on top of that, etc., because I think you get a sense I can do an entire talk just on that, and I don't want to. I can actually teach an entire course on it, but we'll let it go. So with that, October 7th happens. That's the bad news. The good news, also very Israeli, is that the turnaround begins that morning. partly at the upper end of the system, more the political than the military. The military is still kind of in shock. And at the bottom end of the military system, and I want to start with them. Because Israel, in that sense, is a kind of crazy country. Since we serve as regulars and reservists, we're also intimately aware of why we're serving. And I'll just give you one example. I've trained with and I have trained U.S. military officers now for over 2 decades. And in sitting and talking, something that often comes up and it's germane to this. And I tell them, and I say this not in any way critical, as a matter of fact, I say it to the benefit of the United States. Your enemies, for the most part, are 10,000 miles from here. For the most part, right? When America, and this is not in favor, it was a good idea or a bad idea, America pulls out of Afghanistan, it leaves a mess 10,000 miles away. I don't live on the border with Lebanon, I live a little bit back. Now you got to realize, Israel's a huge country. It's about the size of New Jersey. It's tiny. And I live north of Haifa, for those who are familiar with the map, which means that when our forces blow up Hezbollah arsenals and munitions depots, which has been happening now for the past number of months, in Lebanon, we hear the explosions in my community. And very, very quickly, the security services send us WhatsApps. It's okay, it's our guys blowing up their stuff. Because, it doesn't have to be. I served for about a decade in Northern Command, the command that's responsible for the North, and I just want to give you an illustration of the difference from a military point of view of the 10,000-mile difference in us. In my office, in Northern Command headquarters, I had a floor-to-ceiling, wall-to-wall tactical map. For those who are familiar with maps, a 1 to 50,000 scale map, which I think is one of the most ingenious inventions ever put out there. For those who aren't familiar, it means that this is a kilometer. And what I'm about to show you is absolutely accurate, not exaggeration. On that map, over here is Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Over here is Damascus, the capital of Syria. And over here is a dot, that's my house. It's kind of sobering to be in your headquarters and have your house on the tactical map. That's something that American forces haven't done for well over a century and a half. There was that civil war you had. Okay? And it's sobering. One of the consequences of all of that is you don't wait. So people immediately, reservists who hadn't been called up and regulars who hadn't been given orders, immediately began moving toward the battle zone. It was chaotic. Some of them, unfortunately, were killed in ambushes because there was no plan. It was run to the sound of the guns. The system wasn't quite up to it yet. The people on the ground were fighting desperately. But the system was trying to get a picture and it couldn't. In part also because the divisional headquarters down there was overrun by terrorists. I'll give you just one story to illustrate the Israeli method. There was an airborne company that was in not north of Israel, but north center of Israel. The company commander realized something was going on. His men had not been sent home for the weekend, as many had been, because it was Shabbat and holiday. And he doesn't have vehicles to get his men down to the fighting zone. So he gets in contact with the Air Force, and he says, send me a couple of helicopters. And they say, well, we don't have the orders to send helicopters. It's got to be coordinated. So he picks up the phone and he calls a friend of his who's a helicopter pilot. And he says, listen, I got to get down to Gaza with my guys. Can you bring me a helicopter? He says, yeah, I can do that. Now, under any other circumstances, they both would have been court-martialed. It's called stealing a helicopter. All right, stealing is such an ugly word. Borrowing a helicopter without authority. Commandeering, whatever. And that's how he gets his company down there, and they get into the battle. So as horrible as what happened that day was, it could have been much, much, much worse had there not been an almost immediate response, again, on the ground level. And that's Israel. On the upper echelon level, a number of things happened as well. First and foremost, by mid-morning, the government declared we're at war. Now, that seems kind of trivial, but it's not. First of all, declaring that you're at war, and Israel's not the United States. It doesn't require, there's no congressional equivalent. There's a parliament, but it's a different system. It doesn't require a congressional declaration of war. The government, the executive, can declare it. But that has economic ramifications, it has military ramifications, it has social ramifications, and they're not so ready to do it. In 2006, we fought a war with Hezbollah during the summer in July and August, 34 days. I was in that one too. The government declared that a war in March 2007. All right, I'm going to say that again in case you weren't following. We fought it in July, August 06, and they declared it a war in March 07. Which meant that I was able to get a ribbon, which is somewhere in my office. Yeah. Okay. So here, doing it already on the morning of the 7th was a huge step. The country had been racked by political divisions, and I won't go into that. The judicial reform, opponents, loud, raucous demonstrations against the government, including calls for non-response to reserve call-up. In other words, people should refuse to appear for reserve duty. And here I'm going to say something carefully but precisely. Those calls not to come to reserve duty did not cause October 7th, but it was one of the calculations in the design by Hamas to do what they did. Okay? In other words, to point to it and say that's why it happened is incorrect, but it was part of the mix. And usually, you know, it's true for all of us. When you make a decision, it's usually not for one reason. It's usually a conglomerate that come together. But they were reasonably certain, as was Hezbollah, and I'll talk about them in a bit, that an attack on Israel under those circumstances would be met with some level of paralysis as the opposition stood against and so on. That morning, the same morning, October 7th, the leaders of the demonstrations got on the radio, got on TV, and said, demonstrations are over. If you get called up, you go. It was over that quickly. And already that day, but primarily the next day, the largest reserve call-up numerically in Israel's history went into effect. 400,000 reservists were mobilized in the fastest call-up in Israel's history. In other words, from the call to full mobilization, took less than 3 days. 400,000 reservists. And suddenly, roughly half and half, I can't go into specific numbers, but for our purposes, good enough. The northern border has 200,000 troops. The southern border with Gaza has 200,000 troops. And the picture by Monday is very, very, very different from what it had been on Saturday. The consequence of all of this is that first and foremost, of the 6,000 terrorists who entered Israel from Gaza on October 7th, by midday October 8th, were all dead or captured, mostly dead, except for those who managed to get back into Gaza with hostages, which was a number. But if you think about it, and this is one of the things that makes counter-terrorist warfare, because this is a terrorist army, not just an organization, but counter-terrorist warfare different from regular warfare, is that, let's start with what regular warfare would be. If a 6,000-man force were to attack an area, it will gain ground. 6,000 men will gain ground. If they're all wiped out in 24 hours, that is what is known as horrific defeat. If a 6,000-man terrorist force does that and kills 1,200 people and takes 250 hostages, and they're wiped out 24 hours, within 24 hours, that is a victory for them. Okay, so what's happening on the ground militarily is more or less the same, but the consequence is very, very different. Almost immediately, we began to bombard Hamas in Gaza as the troops began to get organized to go in. And while that was happening, a low-intensity war began in the north, along the northern border, with Hezbollah. So I'm going to pause the Gaza part and go to the Hezbollah part, because this is happening simultaneously, and we're living it simultaneously. I'm trying to relate it as we saw it, and not just as civilians. I was connected already by Sunday. I wasn't called up for another couple of weeks, but trying to track what's going on. In all probability, we don't know for sure, Hassan Nasrallah isn't in any condition to give interviews anymore. We've sent him to a better place for all of us. But leader of Hezbollah knew Hamas's plans. He did not know the date. The head of Hezbollah, Yahya Sinwar, was extremely careful, very tight on security. There's a report that's been going around the last few days that Sinwar was going to meet with Nasrallah a few days before, and we prevented it, and that stopped him from telling Nasrallah, I'm not convinced. In other words, I'm not convinced that even if they had met, he would have told him that the 7th was going to be the date, because he didn't even tell his own people that it was until 2 o'clock in the morning on the 7th. In other words, they knew they were training for stuff, they knew they were organizing it, but only as they were moving into their attack positions did they learn that this was the real thing and it was actually happening. It was very, very tight security on his part, which is why we were surprised by it. So Nasrallah knows it's going to happen, he doesn't know when it's going to happen, and boom, on the 7th, there it is. And he's not ready for it. By the time he gets organized for it, we've already defeated Hamas. We already have 200,000 troops on the border. We've evacuated 100,000 civilians from the border, and many of them still refugees. They haven't gone home yet. And now, instead of an October 7th scenario, he's facing 200,000 Israeli troops. And he says, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Watching us bombard Gaza, knowing that we're about to go in, only solidifies him in that position. But he can't sit by and do nothing, and he begins firing rockets and, more importantly, anti-tank missiles into the Israeli communities along the border, causing enormous destruction, something, of course, not reported. Don't get me started on the American media. It's its own story. And you should know, those who have the Israeli app, the Red Alert, or any of the others, and you track it, the anti-tank missiles that were fired into those communities don't trigger the alerts because they're direct fire, they're line of sight, line of fire. The alerts are only triggered by rockets that fly in a ballistic arc. So much of the damage is not only done by them, but it's done in a way that even those who are paying attention from the outside are not aware of it. And they're extremely accurate. And we go into a period of tit for tat with Hezbollah, but really beginning to degrade them on a gradual basis. And this is a very, very well thought out plan, something that's only coming out now publicly, and I can tell you, if I were here 6 months ago, I wouldn't be able to talk about what I'm about to say. We know we're going to be fully engaged in Gaza, and we are very shortly fully engaged in Gaza. We don't want to fight a two-front war because it's just not a good idea. We can if we have to, but prefer not to. And incidentally, not so much because of the ground forces per se, but because of the support, the artillery in the air, that we don't want to divide between the two fronts. What we do instead is gradual damage building up without triggering in their minds that there is this plan to degrade their capability. I can tell you now, again, something I couldn't have said months ago, that in that period of about a year from October to October, over 700 Israeli special operations missions were done in primarily South, but not only South Lebanon. In other words, this is stuff you didn't hear about, I know, because it wasn't even reported in Israel. It was highly classified. 700 in a year, you can do the arithmetic of the frequency, an average of 2 a day, going in and destroying key targets, Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. And then typically, once the target was destroyed and the force was extracted, the Air Force hit that target so Hezbollah wouldn't know that it was hit by a special operation on the ground. We're sneaky. Also, while it's going on, when the opportunity presents itself, we take out leaders of Hezbollah. We were doing it already with Hamas as well. And here I just want to say something briefly on the subject, because what we did in the past year plus was very different from what we had done in previous years, except for one case. In previous years, and America does the same thing, did it with bin Laden, for example, there are key leaders that if you take them out, first of all, taking them out just makes the world a better place. It just does, right? But taking them out also has a positive, focused effect, but it doesn't have a long-term effect. Because another leader comes in, it takes them a year or two or whatever, and they might even be better. You don't know. The exception that we did in the past was in the aftermath of the attack on the Israeli athletes in the Munich Olympics in 1972. The attack was done by an organization called Black September. It was part of Fatah, part of Arafat's organization, our Partners for Peace. And Steven Spielberg made a movie about it. He said virtually nothing is correct in that movie. In his version, Golda Meir, who was then the prime minister, calls in the security guys, primarily the Mossad, and she says they killed 11 of ours, we'll kill 11 of theirs, an eye for an eye. That's simply not true. What she said was, every single leader of this organization who had anything to do with anything to do with anything to do with that dies. That was in 1972. We got the last one in 1979. Black September ceased to exist because it had no leadership. But that's a major operation. It's a very, encompassing operation. And we hadn't done it. We did more, as I said before, take one out when you get a chance. It's a good thing, but limited impact. After October 7th, we went back to the Black September method and put out charts for our people. Some of them were publicized. Top rank, second rank, third rank, fourth rank, fifth rank, sixth rank, all the way down. Everybody on the table on the chart dies. And we accomplished it for the most part. And that means there's no replacement, there's no hierarchy, there's no lateral, right? Shatters an organization. And in the months of the first year, when we did that to Hezbollah, we did it sort of point by point, but taking out sort of key people along the chart. Until the beepers. By the time we got to the beepers, we had essentially degraded Hamas in Gaza. Sorry, I'm going back and forth, but this is kind of a two-step. We had degraded their military capability, and we pushed them back to being a more classical terrorist guerrilla organization, which is still dangerous, but not on the scale of what it had been. When we went into Gaza, Hamas had something like 28 battalions of trained, what would be considered light infantry. Not super quality, but still dangerous. And at this point, they're down to about 2. They've recruited others, but the guys who they've recruited are not of the quality of what was, because they haven't been trained. And we showed in the course of the fighting in Gaza, there was a great fear on the Israeli side of going into Gaza. We showed our overwhelming capability in dealing with them. Gaza is primarily urban warfare. South Lebanon is different. It's more open. There are towns and cities, but there's a lot of open terrain, hills, brush, forest. Gaza is primarily urban, with an over 500-mile-long network of tunnels under those cities at multiple layers, going down in some cases as far as 10, 15, 20 stories below ground. And we called it the metro, think the New York subway system, right, with all sorts of different. Now, urban warfare is the nightmare of ground warfare. And tunnel warfare is the nightmare of the nightmare, but primarily we're talking about urban warfare. And it's known, and I've been a tactician and tactics instructor for many, many years. It's generally known in the literature that it's the great equalizer, it's the leveler. In other words, even a highly superior force going in against an inferior force in a city is likely to take casualties at a ratio of 1 to 1. 1 to 1. For every one of them you kill, you're going to lose one, because the urban environment simply favors the defender there, especially if it's a defender who's been there for over a decade, who's fortified it in preparation for the war that they know they're going to start. And you get the picture. So as of the ceasefire, by our estimates, which I know are low because our estimates are based on what we know for sure and not beyond, we've killed about 20,000 Hamas terrorists out of an initial number of 30,000. And I can tell you with the certainty of experience that it's much easier to deal with them when they're dead than when they're alive. They're more docile, and they don't do it again. We've also captured a whole bunch of them. I'll come to that in a moment. But I'm going to say that number again, 20,000 that we've killed. In the process, we lost about 400 troops. Now, every one of those is a tragedy. And some of them were friends of mine. One actually was a neighbor of mine. But if you look at the ratio of 20,000 to 400, including the tunnels, you understand the overwhelming superiority of the IDF versus Hamas at its highest trained level. We also took a lot of them prisoner, and that's a number that I can't tell you because that number is not public. And if you're asking yourselves, why take them prisoner? The answer is because dead men tell no tales. Prisoners are what I call the gift that keeps on giving. And much of our success in that battle was the result of information that we got in real time from the Hamas terrorists that we took. Our army interrogation teams are in the field interrogating them when they're captured. They're not brought back to some place. They are ultimately for further interrogation. But, for example, in Shifa Hospital in Gaza, our interrogation team was operating in the lobby. Patton, who knew something about this business, famously wrote, "Information is like eggs, the fresher the better." This was freshly laid. And it allowed us, that's part of the success, was this as well. So if you have any questions in your mind, why even take these people alive? That's why. That's why. In addition to that, we were extremely careful about not harming civilians, despite all of the libel in the world, genocide, and all of that nonsense. If you look up on the UN's website, and the UN is not exactly friendly to Israel. You know what UN stands for, by the way? Useless nudniks. And if you don't know what a nudnik is, I'll help you out. A nudnik is the person behind you going, nudnik, nudnik, nudnik. Okay? The UN's documents show that in 21st century warfare, the typical ratio of civilians to combatants killed is 10-1. And that includes battles that the United States military took part in, and those are the only ones I'll compare myself to. Because we're talking about moral, ethical systems. Not systems that don't make mistakes, and not systems that don't have people who need to be prosecuted for whatever. We're not perfect. Just like the US is not perfect, Israel's not perfect. But I'm certainly not going to compare myself to the Russians or the Chinese. Okay? 10-1. If you believe Hamas's numbers, which are lies, it was 1-1. Okay, Hamas claims that 40,000 Gazans were killed. We know that 20,000 of them were terrorists. By the way, if you believe Hamas's numbers, you will also believe the miracle that not a single Gazan died over the past year of natural causes. Not one. How's that for a miracle? 1-1. That shows the care that we put into doing what we did and reflected by the numbers. And of course, the world then condemns us for genocide and that sort of thing, but that's Jewish history. And with that, we moved ultimately into a ceasefire for a number of reasons. But before I get to that, I want to go back up north. The beepers, the operation that I call Hello, Goodbye. Apparently, and it seems to be the case, the decision to use the beepers was based on indicators that some of the Hezbollah tech guys were beginning to get suspicious about them. And we were moving into what's known as a use them or lose them situation. Now, the beepers themselves are an Israeli story because Hassan Nasrallah, about over 10 years ago, decided that cell phones are not secure enough. Israel could track them, and we were. We not only knew where they were because of their cell phones, but what they were saying. And anybody knows if you use a cell phone today, the minute you turn it on, everybody knows what you're thinking. You start getting ads. You think about something and you start getting ads for it. I don't know how they do it. I'm devoutly low tech, I don't understand it. And he says, we're not going to use cell phones anymore, they're too dangerous. We've got to move over to beepers because they don't transmit, they simply receive. And they're safe. We found out about it through discussions, and by the way, there's very little that goes on in Lebanon that we don't know about. Sinwar, the late and unlamented head of Hamas, I'm talking Yahya Sinwar, his brother, Mohammed Sinwar, is now the leader of Hamas in Gaza, was very, very careful, I mentioned before. He beat the Israeli intelligence electronic system in a very, very simple way. He did all of his communications by handwritten note. All right, you don't out-tech the Israelis, you cut them out. And he would literally send his messages and his orders by handwritten note, hand it to a trusted courier who would take it to the recipient, who would write a handwritten note in return and bring it back. Not terribly efficient, but extremely secure. And security counts. Nasrallah was not so careful, and by that point we were pretty much all over him, and we knew what his plan was. And the Mossad and Israeli intelligence came up with an idea. Let's sell them the beepers. So we made a beeper that was slightly better than the Chinese model, with a built-in, no extra charge option of a packet of high explosives attached to the battery. We created a fake company in Eastern Europe, sent a sales agent to Hezbollah and offered them a package deal of 12,000 beepers that totally undercut the Chinese, and they bought it. And when the decision was made, and it wasn't a light decision because we also knew that once the decision was made to go, it meant to go all the way. You didn't use this level of device and just let it go as a one-off. So when the decision was made, the continuing operation was already kicked into motion. And on that day, 6,000 beepers beeped and then went boom. Now, part of the brilliance of this, and in the West, this was classical terrorism. No, this was classical anti-terrorism. Because every single person who had a beeper was a legitimate target. And by sending a message first, it made sure that the correct recipient had the beeper before it went off. Including, by the way, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. What was he doing with a Hezbollah beeper? We killed a bunch, we seriously injured a bunch, and by seriously injured, people who will require a great deal of rehabilitation before they're, if ever, back in the field. Blinded a bunch, in other words, wrecked an entire echelon of Hezbollah command, again, up and down the system, and shattered their communication system all in one swoop. And just when they thought it couldn't get any worse, the next day we set off their communication system, their communicators, their walkie-talkies, which were handed out only to higher level people. And at that point, you got to imagine, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination, that the leadership is saying, who talked? Who can I trust now? Where were you? And that also shakes the system. Immediately after that, we started going heavily after the leadership. We took out Hassan Nasrallah, and I'm skipping because there were a lot of operations. We took out the entire command echelon of their assault force called Redwan, who are the guys who were supposed to do in Israel's north what Hamas did on October 7th, including taking the city of Haifa. In other words, we're talking about orders of magnitude worse than what happened on the 7th. With Nasrallah, former Defense Minister Gallant told the actual decision-making last week. He told it in an interview. He said they came to him, the Air Force came to him and said, we know where he is, where Nasrallah is. We can get him if we have authorization. He said, what do you need? And he said, well, in order to get a 90% probability of killing him, we have to drop 40 tons of bombs on the target. He said, make it 80 and bring it up to 99%. We're not playing. 80 tons of bombs were dropped, and he was killed. His number two had been killed a couple of months earlier. His replacement was killed the following week. The guy who was meant to replace him was killed the next week. And the guy who's leading Hezbollah today is named Naim Qassem. He was their nominal number two from the 1980s. He was never considered to be of the quality to be the leader, but they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and there he is. So he became the leader. He is the most unfortunate, depressed character in the Middle East, maybe the world. He's considered so low quality that nobody's even trying to kill him. Can you imagine you finally make it to be Secretary General of Hezbollah and you can't even get on the list? At the same time, the Air Force began hitting targets. The intelligence guys did a tremendous job marking targets. The Air Force, and it pains me to say this as an infantry officer, the Air Force did an amazing job. Took out target after target after target and destroyed somewhere between 80 and 90% of Hezbollah's rocket capability. So that when this went up a level, they didn't have the capability to do what they had planned to do, which was to fire 2,000 rockets a day into Israel. Now, in my community, we had at least 2 alerts a day. We didn't have anything actually fall into our community. The Iron Dome did a fine job. But it was much less than had been anticipated before the war. And then the ground forces went in and essentially finished the job. And now we have ceasefires. And here I want to be clear on something. There are ceasefires as part of an agreement. So there's a ceasefire and the agreement, and the two are connected, but they're not the same thing. Because Hezbollah has been violating the agreement since day one, as has Hamas on the other side, up to and including where we are today. And the Israeli news just before I came in here said that the Israeli leadership believes that they will release hostages on Saturday, but it's a belief, and others will wait and see. And here I'll remind you, I don't do prophecy. Don't ask me what's going to happen on Saturday, other than the fact that it's Shabbat for me, I'm not doing anything. Okay? Just a few words about the Hamas ceasefire. The Hezbollah one is a military one built into all sorts of agreements not to move in. And here I'll simply say that on both sides, we've taken a policy of zero tolerance of violation. And that is ultimately what will dictate the outcome. In other words, if we slide back into what we did before, which is, all right, we're not going to go to war over 10 terrorists and 5 rockets and this and that. In a few years, we're going to be right back where we started. If we maintain zero tolerance, then perhaps we're not going to get peace out of it, but at least we'll get security out of it. Okay. The difference between the North and the South, Hezbollah and Hamas, is of course the hostages. And we came to an agreement. We're paying a very high price for it. And if you read the news, the reports, the detractors say, well, Israel made a deal now that was almost identical to the one that was offered in May. It could have been done in May. That's what's known as telling the truth and lying at the same time. Because it is true that the deal is very, very similar. What's not true is that the world is in the same place as it was in May. And I'm not just talking about the change in American administration, although that's part of it as well. Nasrallah was alive in May. Yahya Sinwar was alive in May. Mohammed Def, who was Sinwar's military commander, was alive in May. Assad was still in control of Syria in May. Iran still had its air defense system intact, which has completely been eliminated, etc. I can go on, but I think you get the picture. The situation that Israel finds itself in making this agreement is very, very different, and context counts. We were also in a position where of something of diminishing returns in Gaza because we were limiting our operations because of the hostages. And if we want to finish the job, the hostages have to be taken kind of, off the board. So we're paying a high price in terrorists, we're paying a high price in giving them a ceasefire, and they're certainly rebuilding, but we have this obligation. It's a human obligation, it's a Jewish obligation, it's an Israeli obligation, and beyond that, it happened on our watch. In other words, they weren't grabbed somewhere else and we were, kind of ministerially responsible. We were responsible for it not happening, and it happened, and under the circumstances, it costs. That's where we are today. Hamas violated the agreement before it even went into effect, and they have violated it continuously ever since. We have responded, but since we want the hostages out, and they know it, there's a limit to how far a response can be, but they also know every hostage we get out lowers their insurance policy. And we're at that point now, and this is, I'll conclude with this. We're at that point now where we're reaching some sort of an unholy, immoral balance where we don't know how many of the hostages are still alive. Very few, I don't have a number. Very few. We can tell from the condition of the 3 men who got out last Shabbat, last Saturday, that they're in horrendous shape. By the way, not by coincidence, under specific orders of the Hamas leadership to starve them. And they may feel that they're in a position where they can't really give much more out and up because of the negative effect it's having on their public relations in the world. And I'll add one final point before I conclude. It is my belief, and it's purely a belief, that they will never voluntarily release all of the hostages. When we think of hostages, there are actually 3 different types. I'm going to leave one out. We'll talk about 2 because they're the most prevalent. The most common type of hostage, and the type that we've been dealing up until now, is hostage taking for ransom. Kidnap. You kidnap someone in order to trade them for something. If it's criminal in the United States, it's typically for money, but it could be for any sort of good, any value. And that's what we've seen up until now. But there's another type of hostage we don't talk about. Fascist, Nazi, totalitarian type systems, and they fall into all the categories, will take hostages unconditionally, not for trade. The Nazis did this regularly, but for insurance. And the Nazis would go into an area, round up 2,000 to 3,000 people at random, take them hostage, and say, any attacks on our soldiers, we randomly pick 200 and we shoot them. Those people were not held for trade. They were held for threat. And Hamas, most likely, will hold at least a few for that, because the minute they give up the last hostage, all bets are off. And it's clear that the Trump administration is thinking exactly the same way. So we're in that kind of difficult period of where, if we don't get the last ones out, where do you stop and say, these are all we're getting? It's not simple. So that's the merry mess we're in our part of the world. On that happy note, I'll conclude that, by the way, this is the Middle East. That was a happy note. So thank you for having me. Thanks for coming out. God bless you.
That's right. Give me just a moment here. We're going to let you go. I'm going to pitch a couple of things to him because it's a rare occasion that we are able to get him and, of course, the quality and information that he has. I can assure you that there is much more that he hasn't said here tonight that he's aware of. And so I'm going to ask you now to keep him in your prayers and his family, that their protection, of course, and his continual assistance with the level of knowledge that he has and all that he is doing to be able to continue to stand as a mighty soldier in the army and to protect Israel. Let's do a little quick little fire away here real fast. Current conditions in Israel and Gaza has on the north towards your area of living. What's the mentality of the people? What's that?
The mentality of the people in general is good. It's positive. I didn't mention, I should, when the reserve call-up was made in the aftermath of the 7th, the response to the call-up was 125%.
Amazing.
Okay. Which, by the way, is typical in emergencies in Israel. You call up your forces, and the other guys show up and say, "You're going to war and you didn't call me? What's going on here?"
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And that's largely continued. It's not, there's been a certain degradation over the course of the year plus, but the general attitude is we have to finish this job. That's, broad stroke. The population is, I would say, fatigued, but strong. Yeah. The population of the northern border that have been displaced have a long way to go rebuilding their communities. They will be permitted back at the beginning of next month, but many of those communities are going to take months of physical reconstruction before people can move back.
Okay, that was the next question I wanted to give to you, because a lot of people don't realize when these bombs started flying, of course, we just used the north, for
Right.
example, masses of Israelis
Were displaced.
had to move out and went to Tel Aviv, Haifa, whatever it may be, and have literally been living in hotels. Is
Correct,
that right?
correct.
Okay. At their own expense?
No, at the expense of the government,
Okay.
but at a loss for sure.
Sure.
In other words,
So what do you know the numbers of what that is?
in the north, it's still in the 80 to 90,000 range out of an original 100,000. Some were, the communities that were a little further from the border, they were able to move back in. But the north, as a rule, 80 to 90,000 are still out.
Right. So what general date was it when the exodus took place of
The 8th and 9th
the 8th and 9th of October?
of October, from both areas.
Okay.
The South, the communities of the South were hard hit by the attack, but not heavily devastated as communities. In other words, there were neighborhoods within the kibbutzim. I'm sure you've seen the pictures, but the communities themselves were largely left intact physically.
Gotcha.
So they were able to move back. The security, once again, once we moved into Gaza and once we overwhelmed Hamas, the truth is that the communities along the Hamas border are safer today than they've been in decades.
Right, right.
Okay, so there's been a much more of a return to those communities and rebuilding and so on and so
Not
forth.
as much in the north.
Correct.
So 80 to 90% in the north of people that are still displaced. So we're talking about their occupations, their income, the whole
Correct.
family,
Correct.
everybody. So imagine you having to get up and move, I don't know,
No, move a family
50
of 4 or
miles away,
5
whatever.
into a hotel room.
right?
That gets old really fast.
Right.
Your work is disrupted and a lot of these communities are rural communities that are farming communities and whatever, devastated. Education has now moved to makeshift schools, and many of the school buildings of those communities have been heavily damaged or destroyed. So even though the government says schools will reopen on March, whatever, 3rd or 4th,
Right.
here, I hate to say it, we all know, governments make declarations.
Right.
Reality on the ground,
Not so.
not so much.
That's right. All right. So you mentioned about the hostages, and we were talking about a little bit earlier. That was one of the most devastating things this past weekend. I sat and went through the pictures and listened to the stories, and it was overwhelming. But you're telling me, if we can say this, it's even worse with the next set of hostages coming.
I believe that that's a possibility. And before I get to that, let me say that much of what is being told by the released hostages to their families and to the system is not being publicized. In part because we don't want Hamas not to release people because they know that more stories are going to come out. So we're keeping it
Tamped down.
relatively tamped down. We're hinting at it, but not really saying it. I believe, based on not knowledge but analysis, that one of the possible reasons that they're playing around with this Saturday's release is that the next wave is in even worse condition than those last 3. And we saw the world's response, and in this case, surprisingly, the world actually had a response, and perhaps President Trump's lead on that helped.
Yeah.
They don't want to put people out now who look worse than the last ones, and or put out people who are in such bad shape that they don't survive for very long in Israeli hospitals. So that may be, and I think it's a partial consideration of why they're doing what they're doing.
I'm going to jump to, there you go.
This is why I serve. That's my son. And that,
You had some other pictures that you might put up back there, I'm not sure.
That's a goodbye, I'm on my way back to the Army. That's there.
You have another?
I think those
Okay.
those are the only 2 I said.
Okay. So I could talk to you about the whole United States takeover of Gaza proposal that's going on.
Okay.
Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah. Let me see. I have a podcast. The most recent one that I did deals with this. That's a teaser. It's called Conflict Uncovered, I think.
Yeah, if you can put that up on the wall,
Okay.
that would be great.
It had.
Behold.
I recorded this yesterday. I'm not even sure what time zone. I'm jet lagged in it. Yesterday. So it'll come out either today or tomorrow. Very briefly. First of all, Gaza has been a problem area pretty much since Samson pulled the temple down on himself 3,000 plus years ago.
Anybody hear anything about that?
Okay?
Go ahead.
And it hasn't gotten much better since then.
Right.
Second, all sorts of things have been tried of variations of the same theme of support them, build them, give them the whatever.
Two-state, the whole bit.
2-state, 3-state, 8-state, whatever.
Right.
Einstein famously said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Right.
So the Trump relocation plan, I think, has value just as a plan, forgetting whether it'll actually work or not.
Right.
First of all, because it's an out-of-the-box, completely off-the-charts kind of an idea, which is good. And it tells the Palestinians time is not on your side. They have worked over decades from the premise that time is on their side, which means they can reject any offer because the next offer is going to be better.
Yeah.
And now, this is what I call the Don Corleone method of negotiating. If you reject this offer, I'll cut it in half and I'll make you a new one.
Make an offer you can't
Yeah, make an offer
refuse.
you
That's
can't
right.
refuse. Now, it's my assessment that it's not going to work. Not because Trump can't strong-arm Jordan and Egypt to one extent or another. I don't know if he can, but
Who knows?
nothing surprises me.
Yeah.
But this now, the weakness of the plan is, first of all, that it's essentially a real estate concept. And just as I said earlier about economics, not everything is about real estate. And the weak link of it is the actual population itself and Hamas's ability to thwart it. Okay, so question one is, you've got, let's say, 1.5 million Palestinians. Many of them are simply not going to go because they are ideologically Hamas. In other words, they don't need to be convinced, they're just not going. And you're not going to see images of Israeli troops rolling into these places and dragging people out and throwing them on trucks. That's a non-starter. Even those who might want to go, Hamas will simply say, if we find out you're planning on leaving, we will shoot you. All of your entire family. And if you manage to get out, we'll round up your brothers and your parents and we'll shoot them. And I believe that that is going to have the deterring effect that one would expect it to. We can destroy Hamas's military capability. In other words, we can make it so that they are no longer a serious threat to us. It will be much, much more difficult to make them not a serious threat to their own people.
Right.
Because for that, you just need a few thugs with AK-47s,
Right.
and they've got those.
Right.
So I think that's the weak link of the plan. But still, throwing it out there is a good idea.
That's
because
totally
shake 'em up.
out of the chain, off
Shake
the
them
chain.
up and shake them down.
And the as it is, as you showed me before the service, the Gaza Strip is it's worse than a war zone. It is
Absolutely.
is
It's
desolation.
devastated.
Yeah,
It's devastated.
yeah. There's not hardly a building left standing, so it's uninhabitable in a lot of different terms. Of
Yes.
course, the tunnels are still in there, so there's a lot to be
Yes,
taken
there's
care
still
of.
work to be done.
Okay, a couple others and then we'll be done. So tell me, why should Gentile people, why should we know all of this? Why do we need to know what you're talking about?
First of all, because in a world of lies, it's important to know the truth. Lies have their own wings, their own power, and truth has its own power. Not knowing makes you susceptible to the lies. Right? Lies are invasive, they're corrosive. You begin speaking in the terminology of lies. Okay. Quick mini sermon, all right? Okay.
Leave me some Torah. Do it in Hebrew. I just want you
בסדר,
to
אין שום בעיה, אני יכול...
Yeah, okay.
אם
Yeah,
תרצה.
you
What we say influences what we think, okay? We're used to saying what we think influences what we say, but it works both ways. And if you consider all of the injunctions, and there are many, in Scripture and in other literature, Jewish and Christian, against speaking, in Hebrew it's called Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, or saying bad, and that includes lies. We usually think that it's because of the effect it will have on our listener, right? In other words, don't say something bad about someone or to someone because of the effect it has on them. But we don't consider the effect that it has on us. And that is even more damaging because we're likely to be doing it repeatedly. So lies fall into that category. We incorporate them, even if we don't believe them. We use their terminology, and that affects the way we think, and comes back to good and evil.
That's right.
It helps spread evil in the world, and retards the spread of good. So knowledge of truth is a value in and of itself.
That's powerful. Okay, so there is a known cells across the United States. They've come in through the southern border and the whole thing. How concerned do you think the United States needs to be in light of that?
Extremely. We saw what happened in New Orleans.
Right.
That was, I don't like the term lone wolf. That was an individual who was
Acting as an operative for
right,
the whole
right,
organization.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Today in the social media network world, you can receive an order without it being directed toward you. In other words, it's up there, and it's enough that one of them says, "All right, I'm going to do it." There are organized cells, Hezbollah for sure in the United States, I imagine others as well, who are waiting the order to go. The Hezbollah ones are answerable to Iran. And I would say when, and I believe it's when and not if, we go after Iran, and hopefully it's we, and not just,
Right.
not just
Not
we.
just Israel, yeah.
Okay, they will try to activate those cells. Not before. The Iranians don't waste their operatives, but they'll use them when the time comes. The system, I know the system is aware in general of it. I don't know how aware. I mean, that's above my
Right.
pay grade. I'm talking about the American system.
Right.
But I imagine they've got a sense of at least a lot of them. But as Donald Rumsfeld famously said back in the day, there's we know what we know, and we know what we don't know, and then there's the we don't know what we don't know. And that's always an issue.
That's the case we're in.
Yeah.
Okay, so you gave me this great idea. We're adding on to the building here
Okay.
with a brand new foyer.
Okay.
And you told me that the IDF was using the foyer of the hospitals for interrogation zones?
Yes. Go for it. And if you need consulting, you know how to reach me.
That's what I'm saying. We need someone out there. If you'll come back and
you
help us
WhatsApp
with
me,
that.
I'm here.
You're there. All right, good. I will just tell you, this is a wealth of information, of course, a different kind of Wednesday night service, but I hope that you see the value in understanding more firsthand of what's taking place right here. And I can assure you that all of our military men and women that are in this room right now can appreciate the fact that there's a man who is standing in the gap and is doing the call of God upon his life to bring this information to people. And I am, for one, extremely thankful that he has come our way in little old Pace, Florida tonight.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to ask our guys that got buckets or whatever, and he don't need security. I walked up behind him today when he first got here, walked into the office where Victor was, and I was the one who was afraid, and he didn't even know I was in there. But I can tell you that he's a friend of this ministry, and this will not be the last time, of course, whenever he comes back this way to be able to bring us more information. You pray for Elliot and his entire family, and I'm going to ask him to step right down here, down front, and he'll be able to receive you. I want you to come, and they'll have buckets available. You can drop a offering toward him. We're going to give an offering from the church entirely, but I just feel like that you would appreciate the opportunity to be able to just minister to him in an offering somehow. If you are going to come and shake his hand, please realize there's a whole bunch of people and one of him. All right, so make it brief, because he will go home tonight and lay his head down for about 2.5, 3 hours and get up and hit the plane and go where's next? Colorado. How many of you know Colorado needs this Jesus right here? Come on.
Western Colorado.
Western Colorado. All right, so we're going to have to get them all off of their vaping devices, and then they'll be able to understand what's going on. Would you stand to your feet, and would you please give our very special guest here tonight, Elliot Chodoff, the greatest hand that you can, and appreciate him for being here. we will ask you, please, you can come right down and place it into the buckets if you want to. Shake his hand, let him know how much you appreciate him. Please use minimal time for him, and I appreciate you doing that. God bless you. Don't miss Wednesday night, or this coming Sunday, I should say. This is Wednesday. Sunday, don't miss it, 10 a.m. We'll look forward to seeing you. Maestro?